You're listening to My Spouse Has Dementia, a podcast that uses personal stories, occasional interviews, and simple rituals to support dementia caregiving spouses. My goal is to help us survive because about 40% of us die first. I'm Zita Christian, writer, life cycle celebrant, widow. My husband had Alzheimer's. What follows is an interview I did with my friend Victoria Burdick. The original interview is for a show I have on YouTube called Page One. Page One is a show for writers, and in this interview I'm talking with Victoria about a set of essays that she wrote about 30 years ago. I'll let you know right now that those essays are not in any form that you can purchase. I still think you'll find the interview helpful because Victoria talks about courage. I don't know if she saw it that way, but I sure did. Between now and dead, you've got a purpose. Don't be timid. Who might have said those words? Maybe an Army drill sergeant, or maybe a football coach. I heard those words from a hospice chaplain who was also a dear friend. Victoria, thanks for being on the show.
My great honor, my friend.
We met in the world of wedding officiants, which led us into a world of funerals, which led us from life experiences into discussions about grief and more. And all of that then is bringing us, after many years, to this moment right now, because I want to talk with you about a set of essays you sent to me several months after my husband died. And at the time, I was too raw to read them. As it turns out, it would have been the perfect thing for me to read, but I wasn't aware of it at the time. So then when I did read them, I thought, oh my gosh, your essays deal with the themes of courage and survival. One of the things you said in the essays was that the experiences that you entail, they gave you a raw glimpse of my mortality. A lot of people who watch this show are writers. So it's not just that I want to talk about what's in the essays. I also want to talk about the connection to the process of writing, because there's something in your essays that lends itself to several other forms. I often tell writers, when you're working on a novel, because I teach fiction, you need to consider the context of your story. What is the milieu in which this story is taking place? Yours, for these essays, begins with a cancer diagnosis. Tell me first, what inspired you to write the essays? What was the purpose of writing the essays?
Well, the essays are not fiction. They're real life. It's a documentation of this process that I was physiologically put through, and it was inspired by clawing to survive. It was a survival story, and is. I'm 70 years old now. This was back in my 40s.
And you have clearly survived. In reading the essays, I was struck first by the fact that there was an intention for these essays. They were to be beginnings of chapters for a divinity text.
They didn't actually start as that. I was in divinity school when I was writing it, and I was on break, actually, and I wrote it in a very short amount of time. My girls and I were camping on the shores of Center Harbor up in Maine, and it just poured out of me. And we're living in a tent, and I'm sitting on a hillside overlooking the sea writing this, and it just came out of me really quickly. And as I started looking at the process, I shared it with my master's coach, and he said, we need to do something with this. Can you break it down so that we could use this as opening in a text that we're doing, a divinity text that we're doing? And I was like, absolutely, I can try to do that. And that's how it ended up being what it is.
Okay, so there's the connection to a different format. because I have to tell you now, and I'm going to say it again, I know later, I read these essays and I thought, well, at first I thought memoir. I thought maybe novel. And then I thought, oh, screenplay. I mean, I could see so many forms this taking and, expanding it, because bringing it up to date, because you've gone through a lot of other things since then as well. I want to dive into what I think was like a primary context to get the story started. In talking about writing fiction, you want to start on the day that's different, show an ordinary world, but start on the day that something's different. You had been diagnosed with cancer, and then you got involved in an experimental program at a medical university. And then the day came where you quit the program, no warning. Talk to me about that part.
Well, I had, being a former CNM midwife, I had some medical background, but not a lot. I always approached everything more spiritually than academically. And I started going to Brown University only because I could get up there, digging into their library, falling asleep on their floor, and researching the cutting edge of things that were happening experimentally with this type of cancer. And it just provoked me to really seek some radical alternatives. And it's not like the typical kind of alternatives. Yes, I was doing self care, that kind of thing, and massage and acupuncture and all sorts of different things. And I believe all of it as a whole contributed to the result. But I also feel as though I was being led towards something much more specific. And I think those things were what led me to an enzyme injection thing that I was doing. And it was fantastic and very painful, and ended up being what worked best.
Then comes the day that you quit the program, you walked out, you sat outside, you had that moment that we've all had for one reason or another in life, where you sit down and the emotions just flood, whether in the form of tears, or you go for a run, or you do something to express all the stuff that's built up inside. You calmly walk back into the medical facility. You say a kind goodbye to the staff you've been dealing with, and then you speak to the doctor who was in charge of the program and said the equivalent of, I wish you well, but I'm leaving.
Yes.
And I know his response wasn't very kind and was, frankly, I thought awfully condescending, but that's not the point. The point is you knew what you needed to do for you.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because I've known you for a long time too, and you describe yourself in these essays as a lone wolf, I get it. And it is definitely within the realm of believability for me to see you in that situation. You come to your decision, and this is a pivotal moment because you have cancer. You have two little girls. And this option has been offered to you. Obviously, there are no guarantees. I mean, it is an experimental program, and something is telling you this isn't for me. And you leave. And there was a line that you had in one of the essays where you said, the beauty of this overload is that I am no longer easily influenced. I have to tell you, I did a little fist bump for you in that moment. And I could see you sitting on the grass outside of the facility. You didn't say the words, but I could hear them inside you. I want to survive.
Yes.
And that to me is that's the theme of this. I want to survive. And then there's all these experiences that show your courage in surviving. Now, here's where I think it gets uniquely interesting, and where I'm thinking screenplay, because I remember from conversations with my former agent, and I mentioned a couple different story ideas that I thought were gripping and like, oh my gosh, I can see, this is really dramatic. He said, I know you think that, but that sort of thing happens to a lot of people, and it needs something oomphy. I mean, something like more to make it something that would warrant a screenplay or a novel or that kind of big attention. And in this case, I could see, yeah, there are a lot of people battling cancer, living with cancer, learning to coexist with it. So I understand that need in terms of storytelling. Like I'm talking to the writers out there, for that added piece of drama. So you enlist the financial and emotional support of family and friends so that you can go to the Festival of Tall Ships in Europe. Foreign land. I don't know if you speak languages other than English. I don't think you know anybody there. You've never mentioned anything about that. And so I'm thinking, why that? That just seems an unusual thing to want. What motivated that?
Well, I've always sailed my whole life. So, and I'm a wooden boat, classic boat person. And I was first mate on board a Dutch vessel at the time out of Rhode Island. And there was a photographer on board, and he saw my candid photography from the vessel I worked on. And he said, "That's exactly what I need for my book." So he had me go along with him to the Cutty Sark races, the tall ships races in Europe, as a candid photographer. I had an 8-week prognosis. I left my daughters with my mother and father sailing up on their boat for a month to Nova Scotia and back, while I went to Europe, and not in good shape. But my motive really was, this is a last hurrah, or this is an essential part of my experience. I need to do this. And the lone wolf inside of me wanted to be on board, wanted to see what I could do in these challenging situations. And I was alone. I was not, I had a press pass and that was it. And I went on 12 different ships doing candid photography, but found myself in incredible situations on every ship. And I'm so grateful for it, because each one was part of my curriculum.
Well, you had a line, and I jotted it down here. I hope I can read my own handwriting. You said, I somehow knew the alienation and the dramatic aloneness would
Yes,
force me to confront my inner being and hopefully my highest wisdom.
absolutely.
So when I'm talking to writers and about fiction, and yes, this for you, this is not fiction, this is all true. I talk to them about backstory. And writers a lot of times want to put in backstory because they think that the reader needs to know the backstory or they won't understand the story that's going on in the present. And I advise people, you weave it in, you don't dump it in, but even before that, you really, really have to consider, is the backstory important to the current story? And your situation, I need to get the timing right. I know you said you're a sailor, you're a specialist in wooden boats. You talked one time about how the wood of a boat holds a vibration, of
Mm.
all the people on it. And I got chills even just thinking about that. But backstory for you, and I don't know if the timing of this, so I could be wrong, but in the event of October of 1991 that became a movie and a book called The Perfect Storm, you were in that event. You, your dad, other family members, other crew, you had that experience. And that's not something I'm looking to go into right now, except to say that for the writers out there, if you're writing a story about a woman who was going on a festival of tall ships and amateur photographer on these various 12 ships, and she's got an 8-week prognosis because she has cancer, then the backstory of having been on a ship in that nor'easter that wound up in the book and the movie, The Perfect Storm, and that you survived, that becomes backstory it's key to these essays because it's that theme of survival and courage death was all around
Mm.
in that experience. And now here you are on the tall ships. and death is all around you.
Yes.
I think about that and I see this context for all these themes of these essays you've written. One of the other things I tell writers when they're writing a story is you need to understand who your lead character is. And you don't want to just say, this woman is this way or that way. You need to show it. So you have to reveal character. And to reveal character for you and in these essays, I would like it if you would please read essay number 5, the one that's called Tall Ships. And for you writers in the audience, I want you to listen carefully and make little notes about what kind of characteristics you would then be able to attribute to this character, this woman who is experiencing this story, because this is how you do it.
It is aboard a 110-foot Norwegian logger, skippered by a German captain, that a life-pivoting miracle occurs for me. He and his elected crew's priorities are clearly to stay eternally drunk. The vessel is void of navigation essentials, like a calibrated compass, GPS, updated charts, radar reflector, etc. On board are the captain's daughters, the exact ages of my own. They obviously suffer neglect and abuse. I make 2 imperative decisions: to live to see my children and to protect the ones on board. We are 6 days offshore through the English Channel, bound for Germany. I am seasick, as well as depleted from the cancer drugs. I feel I have more capable seamanship than anyone else on that vessel, and that's a bleak picture. I maintain long watches at the helm, meanwhile engaging deliberately in company with the daughters, an effort of creative resource, for I speak no German and they no English. I somehow gained their trust, and much to my delight, their affection. Exhausted off the helm, I make foil reflectors to hang in the rigging, some meager effort of safety in horrendous shipping lanes. More than once, I lift the captain's head from the table, guide him to his bunk, and clean up his vomit. I find him one evening fondling his eldest daughter. He threatens me physically, sexually, and I pull my rigging knife on him, and all that is evil in him goes weak and sour. He stays his distance from then on. I share a moment with the daughter, hold her hand to my cheek. We cry and know a common female place, and a bond deepens. Sleep is never fitful, but the old wooden vessel brings me great comfort in her creaks and groans, in her sweet song on this ship of fools. It is a soothing, primal sound. One day till Germany, foggy, blustery seas toss the heavy ship. I end an 18-hour watch. I am terribly sick and fumble below to the head. It is necessary to brace myself on the toilet in the rough waters. I raise my eyes to the mirror in front of me. I am absolutely horrified at what is looking back at me. A wretched, decrepit sea hag, filthy, grotesque, rotting towards death. I'm stunned, petrified. She is my hell, my deepest fear, my worst nightmare, and my own reflection. I squeeze my eyes shut and dig deeper than that vision, deeper than I've ever gone. I whisper aloud through clenched teeth. Please, God, I want to live. It is a plea, a commitment, a root instinct. When I open my eyes, the complete transformation faces me. I see in the mirror now a goddess, wild, gorgeous, empowered, stronger and more beautiful than my being could own. Her eyes were the windows to heaven, and I knew that I would conquer this cancer. In this 20 seconds of miracle, a mirror reflected a divine creative source that was truly who I was, and unquestionably capable of recreating my life beyond my dis-ease. I slept for a few solid hours for the first time in almost a week. My immediate task was to get these children off the boat. I chose to leave the captain's head on the table and snuck into his private papers to find their mother's phone number. Once ashore, I rang her and she met us on our next stop along the canal. Releasing her daughters into her frantic arms, I knew that I had done the right thing for us all. I look back on 1 year later, this experience, and call it going down the mouth of the dragon. Facing my death and my ability and desire to live created a profound turn in both my inner and outer healing. Amidst its inept crew, I loved the ship and thank her for the vehicle to my wellness.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, I know. I could feel myself holding my breath too. And I imagine what it was doing inside you. So that whole experience is decades ago. Now, tell me when you come to the point where there's no evidence of cancer. I want you to talk about how you think of the word remission.
Well, to reinstate the mission of my life's purpose, really. It's through all of this, the grace of just taking breath, being vertical, being live, still having this incarnate earth school to go around in this, in jalopy that I have is such a miracle. And everything inside of me renegotiated the gyroscope of my being into a new position where I saw something very different. And that has led me to being a hospice chaplain now for 26 years and really loving the day-to-day simplicity of living.
I want to get two things particularly. What is the current status of these essays? As far as I know, they're not in a form where people can buy them or read them online or anything like that. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm looking at, will they be part of a blog? Are you considering a memoir or hopefully a screenplay? And maybe that's not something that you can answer right now, but let me ask, are there essays that you omitted? Like, are there things that you thought they don't fit in with the whole concept of introductory paragraphs for the divinity text?
There was much I omitted. One was the condensing of this lunch with Heron was to have something poignant that was more organically charged, more primally charged for these, for the beginning of these divinity texts. That was the concentration, what came down to being lunch with Heron, but there is much more than that. But that much more is also admitting a lot more than that. I'm very private. I don't want a high profile. I don't want to be out there. I never sought to have it be anything other than what it's been so far, a sharing with people who I know have gone through some struggles. It seemed familiar, and I always felt that internal nudge, share this with them, like with you, Zita. And that's happened along the way. But I never thought outwardly of doing more. And I've been encouraged many times. I've had very good authors read and connect with me and say, you've got to go. You got to open this up, get it deeper. You gotta. No, I don't.
No, you don't. But that leads, I guess, to the final question. The experience you had decades ago with cancer, and then there was no trace, and you are in the remission of your life. And fast forward now, you're the age of 70, and I'm 7 years beyond that. And I wonder, in my work doing funerals, your work doing funerals and weddings, but also especially for you as a hospice chaplain, how do you reconcile the fact that there are some people who It's not a matter of facing what it is they're going through, and there's a way of surviving. People die. That's part of the whole life experience. How do you address that?
I would never push anyone my way. It's not, it's my, that was my journey. I've always had a deep, unbelievable respect after hundreds of deaths that I've witnessed and been present for, and family dynamics and all of the stuff that goes along with it. I honor that as a soul's experience. It's I love the term Earth School, because each and every one of us have a unique, authentic being and a curriculum. And that curriculum, for me, Lunch with Heron is a reflection of a bit of mine. But the people that I attend, I leave Lunch with Heron at the door. It does not come in with me. That my stuff, I call it my spiritual backpack. I take it off, I leave it at the door, I walk in, and it's totally about them.
Because
And
everybody has their own journey.
indeed, the most loving thing to do is just offer loving presence. That's the best you have to give.
I agree. And Victoria, on that beautiful and hopeful note, I realize that we are out of time. So I'm going to thank you very much. And thank you for writing it, for sharing it with me, and for talking about some of it here, on page 1. And I love to close this show with the words of the late fantasy writer Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories." So find your story, find a way to tell it, and join me again next time. Thank you. I hope you found my conversation with Victoria Burdick helpful. I realized too late in the editing that I cut a snippet of conversation explaining that Lunch with Heron is the title of the collection of essays. Because Victoria has no intention or desire to seek fame or fortune for her essays, let me tell you that the trauma around breast cancer was one of 3 life and death situations she has survived. Years ago, while driving on the highway, she was hit head-on by a drunk driver. Victoria walked on what she soon learned were broken legs in order to pull her best friend from the passenger seat. It was too late. Her friend was dead. And then there's that fight for survival on the high seas, the disaster told in the book and the movie called The Perfect Storm. Victoria personifies survival. And while I doubt that many of us have faced down death 3 times the way Victoria has, each of us faces the death of our loved one every day. In the previous episode of this podcast, I talk about what I call anticipatory healing. I'd love for you to listen to all of the other episodes of the podcast, but if you can listen to only one other episode, please choose that one. It's episode number 21, all of which emphasizes that when I say, take good care of yourself, those words aren't fluffy. They're fierce, because we need to survive. Thank you for listening.